Hello and welcome to another video for Agile Project Management 101, Running Meetings for a Scrum Sprint. We're now going to talk about the sprint review meeting. So at the end of a sprint review is exactly what it sounds like. You're reviewing what happened in the sprint. And that starts out with the stories that were closed or completed in the sprint. Saying that a story is closed usually means a couple of different things. One, the development has finished for that story. So whatever functionality is available from that code is now available either in a development environment or it may have even been pushed to a production environment. Two, it's passed some type of a test, and that test is what's called quality assurance, or QA. And it essentially ensures that the functionality is going to work, it doesn't break anything else. And there's a lot of different pieces to quality assurance that could be covered in an entire course to itself. But just whenever I say QA, or you hear the words QA or quality assurance, just know that it's a test to make sure that things are working properly and that nothing else is broken because of this new implementation of a function. And lastly, it means that all of the parties sign off on it being complete. And that's part of kind of what's covered in a sprint review. It's covering that functionality and covering what has been closed in terms of the individual story cards. And as a part of reviewing the close process, it's a good practice to talk about what went well and what did not go well. And that's especially true for closed stories. I know the thought is immediately, well, what went well? Well, the story was closed. It's finished. We got the development done in time. It's within that 1 to 4 week window, so we completed what we set out to do. But that's not always necessarily the case. Obviously, you want to talk about those items that did go well and function properly. But sometimes there's going to be instances where you complete something, but it was a nightmare to try to scramble and get it done. Maybe it took double the amount of time to get done, but was such a high priority that you had to reassign resources for it. Maybe there was a blocker that just wasn't addressed right away, and that was a slip up on the Scrum Master's part or on the developer's part. So it's important to talk about what went well and what didn't go well, and that actually feeds into kind of the next meeting section here, the sprint retrospective. We'll talk about this more in the sprint retrospective, but the feedback that's gathered from the sprint review should be taken note of. So make sure to take note of what went well and what didn't go well and discuss that with the team for these closed stories. On the flip side of that, you want to review what didn't get closed. So oftentimes, stories aren't completed within the sprint, again, because of a blocker, because of a reprioritization. Maybe there's just not enough resources to go around in terms of person hours. So reviewing those stories that didn't get closed and covering what went well and what didn't go well are absolutely pieces that you want to include in the sprint review. Along with this, and the stories that didn't get closed, you want to talk about opportunities for improvement. And again, it's setting the stage for the sprint retrospective meeting and then the next sprint planning meeting as well. Getting kind of these items out and talking through them and agreeing on them as well. So after you review the stories that were not closed in the sprint and what went well and didn't go well for both of them, you want to have a little bit of a functionality demonstration. You want to show off the new feature that has been developed. If there are any features, sometimes it's just back-end work and there's no actual new functions to show off. But anything that you think should be shown to those stakeholders should be demonstrated in this meeting. Now, not all features need to be demonstrated if you are changing the style of a button. But for bigger items or maybe more important items, functionality demonstration to stakeholders is a fantastic thing to include in the sprint review. And one of the reasons why you show off the functionality and discuss with the team is it closes that feedback loop. Now, we've talked about feedback loop a little bit in the past, but essentially the idea is that, as we mentioned in the first video, oftentimes when you are developing in a traditional project management style with waterfall, where you are setting up the project ahead of time and continually developing and not getting any feedback, oftentimes the needs of stakeholders change, the environment changes, And in order to minimize issues because of that, you're constantly getting feedback at the end of each sprint from your stakeholders. And in fact, oftentimes you're getting feedback in the middle of the sprint from stakeholders. But the idea is to close that feedback loop within the sprint review and get feedback on the functionality. Other types of feedback and other pieces to feedback that was previously mentioned: delivery dates for either new stories that are coming about based on the feedback or just stories that are already known. The backlog status. So if you are looking at maybe the next set of items here, oftentimes this feedback can allude to what should come next. Capacity. Maybe you are running at full capacity and having to push back stories and stories and stories. So within an organization, oftentimes this means that either you have to start reducing the amount of stories included in the sprint, or if you're lucky and you can get a bigger budget, then oftentimes you will hire someone and get additional resources or reassign people from other teams. Changes in goals is a very important piece of that feedback loop that you are closing through the sprint review. One of the things that is an intangible item of the sprint review that comes with the feedback is it can be a little bit of a morale booster or a reset in terms of righting the ship. And what that means is either, one, absolutely celebrate your successes and these stories that are closed, applaud the people who have done good work, and then two, get that feedback and course correct in terms of changing the goals that need to be changed. Because the simple fact of the matter is that things change. It is a very quick environment. You need to accommodate for that, and the sprint review is a great place to do that. So as the project manager and Scrum Master, make sure to foster those types of discussions with the stakeholders. Ask for feedback from each individual in the meeting as you go around at the end of the meeting. The sprint retrospective is next in the next section here. And again, the sprint review is kind of teeing up for that sprint retrospective.